Bienvenido a The Talks, el podcast de la Fundación MOB, una serie de conversaciones con figuras imprescindibles de la creación contemporánea, un espacio para detenernos, escuchar y descubrir nuevas miradas. Gracias por acompañarnos.
Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome Nick Knight.
Thank you, Tim.
We're going to be talking about fashion photography, so it seemed like a good place to start might be the first fashion photograph you ever remember seeing.
Yes, well, you warned me this might come, Tim, and it would be a long time ago now. So I first started seeing fashion in magazines like the Sunday Times, Nova magazine, back in England in the 1970s. And I was trying to remember the first one I saw, and I have this sort of image that it was a sort of a blue see-through cape or something on a beach in the Seychelles, when fashion photography was all about very glamorous locations. A lot of fashion photographers like Hans Früher would be working in sort of on those sort of white sandy beaches, and it was all about that sort of look. So I think it was that, but it would have probably been in Nova magazine or the Sunday Times.
You know, my experience, I always bring growing up in New Zealand into my things, because it actually was a remote part of the world, and the images that filtered through to you had to be really kind of gutsy and or shocking or provocative. And it's interesting you talk about magazines like Nova, because I vividly remember Nova magazine. I remember a Guy Bourdin shot of a Teutonic blonde freaking out about a tiny little mouse. Do you remember those photos?
I can imagine, when you say Guy Bourdin, so you can kind of imagine the language of Guy Bourdin. I don't remember the specific, I don't think I remember the specific photograph.
But that is a testament to the power of the fashion magazine. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the history of fashion photography, what do you think were the key things that elevated the photograph?
Great magazines, great magazine art directors, great fashion stylists. So we're talking people like Alexei Brodovich, who was in Harper's Bazaar. You're talking people like Diana Vreeland, and of course, great fashion photographers. So whether it's Steichen, or whether it's Munkaski, or whether it's any of the greats you can name, any of the great fashion photographers going all the way through, that's what you had. But you had a system that was geared up to bring the public great fashion imagery. So they would shoot for a week or 2 weeks for 10 pictures. So the whole of the system was geared up to really bring you great fashion photography. And that, we don't want to get into it too quickly, but that's what's changed. It was a different time and for different reasons. But if you had somebody like Condé Nast, who was the person that started Vogue magazine and Vanity Fair, really championing the photographer Steichen and saying, I have the best photographer in the world, you can imagine how Steichen must have felt. It's very different from how photographers get treated now. But of course, I think of all these situations, you get a sort of, you get an abuse of the position. Once a photographer becomes incredibly powerful, then of course it doesn't keep on working like that.
So you encountered images in magazines like Vogue, but they were
not quite, because actually in the 1970s, when I was a teenager, the most important thing for a young British teenager was not the magazine, it was the album cover. So it was a 12-inch square that you would save up all your money to go and buy your whoever it was, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, or Best Motown Chartbusters, or whatever you were into. But this was an expensive purchase, and you would save it up. You save all your money, you'd go on Saturday, you'd buy the album, you'd take it back home, and you put the record on the record player, and then you would sit there and look at the picture on the album cover for weeks, because that was your only contact with a group. And if you were, really into whatever band it was and mentioned whoever it is, that was your only contact. You wouldn't really see them on television. There was one show in England called Top of the Pops, which had like 10 bands on per week. It was on a Thursday night at 7:35, and everybody would watch it, and that was it. So, and if the band you were really into was not on that, and probably a lot of things I was into would not be on that, that was your only way into these people who you sort of, I wouldn't say you hero worshipped them, but they were a very important part of your life. So it wasn't really so much that fashion magazines were leading the way. So you had people, for instance, Grace Jones. And Grace Jones had a great look, and she appeared, Jean-Paul Goude would create this look of her, and it would appear on the front of her album cover, and that's what you fixated on. You know, of course, Vogue magazine was going, and you had Guy Bourdin, you had Helmut Newton, and you had, you know, Turbeville and Sarah Moon in France. But it wasn't really, that didn't cut through to the youth. And at that time, I was a youth.
No, I'm thinking about, I should have said, so one encountered fashion in magazines like Vogue. I'm speaking about, you're talking about Condé Nast and
Yeah.
Brodovich and Steichen and the heroes of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. But that was where people encountered, I think it's kind of amazing when you look at fashion photography, as it's evolved, as it's been elevated into an art form over the years, that say a photo of Avedon's photo of Davima with the elephants,
Yeah,
which is considered to be the most probably famous fashion photograph.
I think it is, but I don't know if that's true of people today. I don't know if you talk to your, you know, a child of 15, 16 today, whether he'd recognize it at all.
But
So it's not relevant anymore.
But it's funny if you look at if you look at that photo, the way it actually appeared in Harper's Bazaar,
Yeah.
when it appeared,
Yeah.
it was this big. It was part of a multi-page shoot
Yeah,
of
after
Davina
me going on about Brodovich and great layouts. Yes.
Yeah, Davima wearing all these different evening dresses in a circus, and there just happened to be one tiny little photo of her on one page of her with these elephants.
Yeah.
Somehow, that became, you know, it's interesting how in context, it was one of many, many images.
Yeah.
And that's what's amazing about magazines at that time, is when you look at them now, you think, oh my God, every page is something you recognize, something that's become almost iconic. And that's how people encountered fashion and fashion photography. But what was the point of those images then? What was it selling? Was it selling the clothes? What was the point of those images?
My belief that a great fashion photograph, just like a great movie or a great record, sells you a dream, sells you a fantasy, sells you something that you think, oh, I can disappear in this, I can be part of this, I can be, you know, it's that dream. It's like going to see a great movie. You know, for a minute or two, you think you're Keanu Reeves or whoever it is, you know, and you want to be that person. And you're sort of, I think a great fashion photograph doesn't show you clothes, it shows you attitude, it shows you style, it shows you allure, all those sort of funny words that now be made into perfume titles. You know, that's what a great fashion photograph shows. It's a dream. And that, in my opinion, is where fashion magazines have doomed themselves. Because if they don't show you the dream, what is their purpose now? But that probably is for later in the conversation.
But those magazines, like Vogue was a very elite magazine at that point. It wasn't a mass market publication, was it? And neither was Bazaar. So those magazines were for quite a rarefied stratum of society. So the dream that it was selling was probably accessible in a way to the readership of the magazine. Or was it, like, so during World War II, were the images in Vogue intended to be a dream to distract people from the horrors of war?
I think it's a sort of funny thing, sort of the relevance to a broader society of fashion in the sort of 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. What it did is great fashion magazines like Vogue and Bazaar would set the tone, and that would influence all the other magazines and all the other fashion-based communications. So they would set the sort of, you know, if it was a sort of, you know, the photographs that were about sort of a sporty American woman after the war, you know, the Americans needed some form of woman to believe in, you know, some sort of, and so it was a healthy, live, kind of this sort of athletic woman. So that set the tone for a whole range of different sort of, you know, whether it was Coca-Cola ads or whatever it was. It set the cultural tone, and that's what a great fashion photo. I don't think Vogue, as you say, or Harper's Bazaar was that widely read. It'd be good to know their circulations at that point. But I don't think it's until the early 1990s, mid-1990s actually, that people like Anna Wintour and Bernard Arnault got their hands on fashion and turned it from this sort of rather weird little bubble that it had sort of become, this sort of little society by itself, and said, actually, we can make a lot more money out of this. You know, why does it sell so little? Why? And they injected an awful lot of money into it because they could both see in their different ways that it could be much bigger. I mean, not that that's any sign of making things bigger isn't a sign of quality, and making things make more money is not a sign of quality. But for business people, it was a way of saying, okay, you've got this undeveloped sphere of kind of excitement here, but most people aren't seeing it and they're not interested in it. So fashion was a little bubble for a long time, and it grew up, in partly as a refuge for young gay men. So partly sort of photographers like Horst or Platt Lines or any of those fantastic Hoyningen, and those beautifully elegant photographers of the 1940s and 50s, they were taking refuge from society. Homosexuality was illegal in so many places in the world. So, it was somewhere where they could indulge their life. So, but that became a way of sort of, if you want, it became this sort of bubble that was in some way in sync with society. So, of course, if you've got young gay men photographing imagery for Vogue or Harper's Bazaar, that's a way of progressing that part of society. But it fell at some point out of sync and became anachronistic and became nothing to do with society. But that's again, is probably later in the conversation.
Yes, at which point? Because I think of somebody like Diana Vreeland, an editor who, a very idiosyncratic editor, who was determined to make her magazine, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar and then Vogue, relevant. And she did that by introducing to the pages of Vogue things that had never been there before, artists, pop stars, she the zeitgeist, I guess, basically. But I still think that if you go back through the history of fashion photography, you see that notion of the zeitgeist all the time, all the time being exploited by even somebody like Steichen. If you think of the portraits that he was taking of artists and writers and things, and that appeared in Vogue, they were cultural gazettes, and that's still, it's still quite thrilling to go back and reflect on all of that.
Well, I think what fashion does quite uniquely as an art form, I know that a lot of people have different views on fashion. A lot of people would consider, and I think there's quite a lot of evidence of this, that fashion's frivolous, that it's actually not one of the true arts. It is not a profound art form, that in some way it's mainly commerce and a bit of kind of frippery. Especially sort of, my father would have thought that. But it's a sort of idea that actually fashion isn't very serious as an art form. And I actually don't agree with that. I think that fashion is probably our most fundamentally important art form because it shows society's desires. It shows our aspirations. And you understand a lot more about a society by understanding its aspirations, what it wants to be, rather than what it is. So a great portrait painter will paint somebody's sort of image and they'll paint their sort of, it's almost a reflection of what they see in front of them. Where a great fashion photographer or image maker will will produce an image of their desires, of their aspirations. And I think if you go back through the history of fashion photography, which I do quite a lot because I like it, you see it's very easy to understand the societies of the time by looking at the fashion. I've just worked for the Met, the Metropolitan Museum in New York, where we did this big exhibition on bringing alive their archive. So you have these beautiful old dresses which are 200 years old. And of course you can't actually put them on a mannequin anymore because the silk is so shot that if you tried to lift it, it would tear under its own weight. So through 3D scanning and AI and a hell of a lot of work, we brought some of these beautiful old dresses back to life. But it isn't just a dress. It isn't just a surface. It's not just the materials. It's what you've got underneath. It's the structure. It's how this dress performs mechanically. But then on top of that, you've got how this dress would have been worn. So if what attitude would the woman have had wearing it? How would she have moved in it? And also, what light do you see it under? And I can't remember which, I was Charles James or Charles Worth, one of them two, had a sort of, when one of you would go and have a dress fitted, he would show you it by gaslight, by electricity, by daylight. So of course, all these things are really important. And the attitude a piece of clothing has is largely due to the person wearing it. So if it's Nancy Astor wearing it, or whoever it is, some great society dame, they bring a lot of attitude to it. And this is the problem that nearly all museums face, is that they have these dead clothes. Once there's no longer a person, once the piece of clothing can't move anymore, once it has no fragrance anymore, once it has no more sound. I mean, the way that clothes used to be marketed, dresses were marketed, was not only, of course, their look, but it was also their sound. It's got a very unpleasant term. It's called scroop. That's the sound of a piece of taffeta rubbing against another piece of taffeta. And that was a thing. If you had very scroop value, your dress had a very high scroop value. That was very
the rustle
nice.
of the bustle.
Well, exactly, because the world was a quieter place. So you would hear the lady coming, and you would hear her scroop. So it was important you got your scroop right. So all these sorts of things are what we tried to bring alive in the Met. So it's fashion plays to a lot of different cultural phenomena. It's a very good way. If you study, and most of our memories are through fashion photography. If you study fashion photography, you see culture changing because you see its aspirations.
Well, when you were talking about what fashion photography can do that is different from actually, the notion of it's like fashion itself. That does fashion reflect or does fashion project? And I mean, I think fashion photography is very in sync with the work of fashion photographers are very in sync with the work of fashion designers in that respect.
You say that, but fashion designers create their garments to be seen in movement, always have done, so important. And yet we've chosen a medium which doesn't show movement, that's all about reducing movement down to a single moment.
But I'm still thinking about the idea of reflection and projection. You don't actually need movement for that. Are you going back to the idea of the zeitgeist? Are you capturing a moment that already exists, or are you creating a moment that hasn't existed? Are you dealing with the past or the present? Okay, are you looking at the future?
You're looking at the projection of an idea, your projection of a desire. And that could be any form of fashion imagery back to fashion illustration. It's a projection of an idealized or an aspirational desire.
And you think this is because that is what fashion photography always did to me. Yes. In my eyes, it was always, you talk about the dream. The dream is a projection.
Sometimes it's in sync with culture. So if you look at the kind of hyper-violent work of people like Helmut Newton or Guy Bourdin or Chris von Wagenheim in the early 1970s, then you look at the sort of movies we were going to see, Clockwork Orange, anything by Sam Peckinpah, all of the kind of ultra-violent movies. It was in sync. You look at Bonnie and Clyde, great film with fashion in it. That was very in sync with the sort of popular culture of the time. So it's very attuned to that. That's why I mean the Vogue was probably only seen by a few people, but the effect of Vogue or the effect of Harper's Bazaar spread out across the whole of the sort of cultural visual mediums.
We were talking about that just before we came on stage here, talking about this curious thing that's developed, the unacceptability of certain images that used to be entirely acceptable. I mean, maybe they weren't acceptable, but they weren't cancelled or questioned the way that those images would be now. When you look at Bourdin or Newton or Chris von Wagenheim, or it's funny. I saw the Helmut Newton exhibition that's on in Venice right now, and the images of the models with raw meat kind of crushed into their faces, and dogs kind of biting them, and it seems to me that those images, or especially as they relate to young women, very young women, in some of the photographs that you would never ever be allowed to make now.
And actually, fashion has brought the spotlight down on itself. So it's actually one of the most monitored of all the kind of contemporary art forms. You can get away with a lot more if you want to get away. If you're a lot freer in that sensorial way. If you're working in film, or if you're working in contemporary painting or sculpture, you can get away with a lot more. But fashion has really, and certainly over the last sort of 20 years or so, brought the spotlight upon itself. So, and then quite rightly. I don't think it's. I mean, the photographer I remember when you asked me about what was my first fashion image was probably, I don't know if it was the first one, but certainly the early ones, by a photographer called David Hamilton, not Richard Hamilton, David Hamilton, who was a chap who used to live in the south of France, out in the south of France. I think he's still alive, might not be. Who would photograph sort of, 10-year-old girls in see-through negligees on the beach. And everybody thought, and he did a film called Bilitis, which sounds revolting. Anyway, but he was championed by bastions of our culture, like the Sunday Times. Sunday Times would run reams of his pictures. But society changes. And the politics of the 1970s were, quite frankly, dreadful. The kind of, the comedy programs you would see, and, I can't speak for what it was like in Spain, but certainly in England at the time, the sort of, political incorrectness of popular comedy was by today's standards, quite shocking. So I remember trying to recommend to a very good journalist called Afua Hirsch that she should look at a program called, Love Thy Neighbour, which was the whole joke was set up because they had a black family living next door to a white family and the language that the white family would use to describe them. And that was the whole point of the comedy. And I felt really quite uncomfortable recommending she should go and watch it, but she was in fact researching into that.
She could have watched Rising Damp.
Was Rising? Oh yeah, 1 minute. They all had it.
They all were
Rising
just.
Damp.
I mean,
what was the one with?
They're still funny.
With Warren Mitchell. Help from the audience here.
Yeah, Warren Mitchell. Till
I'll
Death. There was
David. Till Death Do Us Part.
Till Death.
Thank you very much.
I hated that one. So,
where were we going with this, Tim?
No, I'm thinking about we can make a case for fashion photography reflecting contemporary mores, and
yes,
can't we?
Say it again. We can make a case for photography reflecting what?
Contemporary mores, or what do you say, mores or mores? Customs. Attitudes.
Yes. I mean, it did. But then society is fractured now, so it doesn't do it anymore. But yeah.
Okay, so what do you think were the watershed moments in the history of fashion photography?
Well, there's a few. If you want to go right back, it might be a rather long lecture. But I think the most poignant ones are the takeover from Bernard Arnault and Anna Wintour of the industry of fashion and making it into a much, much more commercial thing. I think that really changed fashion. But it does also go, what Anna Wintour tried to do was also what was the name? Edna Chase? What was the name of the editor at Vogue in the 1950s who sent this sort of letter to all the photographers that should be pinned on the wall saying, if you can't show me the clothes without, if you want to show art, then art should be damned, just show me the clothes. And there's this sort of idea that, how could you say that? How could you say to any artist, whether a sculptor or a photographer or a cineast, that you must take the art away to show the clothes? Because, of course, the whole point of it is you're not showing the clothes. You don't want to see the clothes. You want to see the attitude. You want to see the fantasy, the desire. So, to get back up on track, yes, I think that was the most important point. The watershed moment where suddenly people looked at fashion as a business and said, this is underperforming. We can make a lot more money with this. And they did. And they threw out a lot of the more, if you want, fringe if you want sort of extreme elements of fashion image making, and got the more sort of acceptable image. Doesn't mean they're bad, they're just more acceptable. So, you got all those sort of pictures of girls jumping through New York streets, looking over their shoulder, moving their handbag, flicking their hair. All that. I won't mention any names, but they're still great photographers, but they're not edgy or dark. They're not like the kind of Bourdains, they're not the kind of twisted minds that personally I enjoy, and I think a lot of other people enjoy too. It's a bit sanitized. It's all a little bit cheap and cheerful, not cheap, no, it's all a little cheerful and without complication. But I think that is a sort of cultural thing that comes a bit from America, this sort of simplification of life. Yeah.
So that would involve defanging the art director, the star art director, because thinking about, art direction, we had people like Fabian Baron.
Yes.
And also during this period you're talking about, there were Vogue Italia blossomed under Franco Sozzani.
Fabian Baron was actually reasonably commercial and and still does actually very gracefully make the wheels of commerce go around. And the Italian Vogue was a weird thing. It sold 6,000 issues, so it's kind of slightly meaningless. But yeah, you had a few of those, but I don't think that they're where it went. I think Anna Wintour, Bernard Arnault put lots of money behind, or certainly Arnault put lots of money behind people like John Galliano, McQueen, et cetera, and supported a lot of the more sort of, if you want, rather than the image makers being so supported, the designers were supported. John Galliano was really supported by Bernard Arnault.
And yet, those designers,
At the beginning,
when they were translated into images by photographers like you, that created some of the most fabulous fashion
but that
imagery
wasn't through
of all
magazines.
time.
That was through advertising campaigns.
Advertising, you see, this is at some point, advertising became more of a creative medium than the fashion editorial.
Well, the fashion editorial had lost money. It wasn't financed anymore. So the photographers didn't have 2 weeks to make 10 images. They had 3 days. And the money came from the advertising. So I was supported when I worked with John Galliano at Dior. I was supported to do week-long shoots to get 12 images. So it was back to that, which of course is how it should be. If you want great, memorable images which make your clothes desirable globally, then you need to invest into that. If you churn out tons of images just to kind of, fill out every space across the globe, but they mean nothing, it's a sort of false economy, really.
Then I'm also thinking about the promotional material that if you can call it that, the books you made for Yohji Yamamoto each season, a designer like Yohji Yamamoto. What would you consider them to be? They're promotional, but are they advertising, or what are they?
Well, there aren't many designers like Yohji Yamamoto, and these aren't sort of trends. They're quite unique. Bernard Arnault's championing of John Galliano in the House of Dior was quite unique. What Yohji Yamamoto, the Japanese designer, did in the middle of the 80s was to say, okay, there are about 2,000 people, less than that, 1,500 people I really like, architects, vendors, film directors, and I want to get my vision to them. I don't want them to see my clothes, I wanted to show them my dreams. And that was my brief when I worked for Yohji Yamamoto. He would say to me, show me my dreams, don't show me what I know already, show me something I don't know, so show me something I'd want to know. So it was this sort of desire, this sort of attitude that he would send something that he was proud of, which was a reflection of his clothes, to all these opinion leaders. And in a sort of more successful version of trickle down, it would trickle down, in fact, and then influence a much broader sphere. So you did have that, but that was quite unique. Yohji, as I say, was a very unique designer. Very unique. He was one of I think it was the first designer that I can remember, and I'm going to rely on your better knowledge here, but he was the first designer that I can remember that didn't talk about a woman's body. At the time, you had Versace and Mugler and Montana, and they all showed off a waist or a cleavage or a behind or any sort of physical attribute. Well, Yohji came along with this sea of dark blue and black and showed you a woman's poetry or a spirit or something much more sort of refined and elegant. It was never about a woman's body. It was never about how to show off your lovely legs. It wasn't about that. And that was the first time I came across that. And I came into fashion in a slightly odd way in any case. But I felt I agreed with that. And then this was 1986, and I thought, yes, I don't want to be doing sexy, strumpy, Versace kind of, it wasn't me. I might do it now, but I didn't do it then. And I wouldn't want to do it. It just seemed vulgar. And when I first started, also one has to remember, when you first start, you have all the arrogance of youth. So you've got to show you're different. I hated Helmut Newton. Couldn't stand him. Hated everything. Hated those busty... I thought it was everything I didn't want to do. Fashion photography by the end of the 1970s, and I saw sexualized fashion photography, had become such a parody of itself. It was a sort of cheap joke, the sort of Lothario photographer, the sort of David Bailey character in Blow Up, but 20 years later, it was nothing that any self-respecting young person would want to aspire to be. So the idea of doing sexualized images felt very odd to me. It still does, to be honest.
But it's interesting because you talk about Yohji, but at the same time, Comme des Garçons was doing a collection book each season with a photographer. Matsuda, who nobody remembers now, would do these incredible books, like Victorian photo, with tipped-in prints, like a Victorian photo album, with photographers like Nadia, who nobody remembers now, and actually a very, very young Jürgen Teller, believe it or not, did shoots for Matsuda. So I always felt that they came out of the Japanese attitude towards photography, which was always about anthologizing images. Like, you know, Japanese photographers would make books of their work rather than have exhibitions or print editions of their work. And I always thought that what you were doing for Yoji, what all those photographers like Peter Lindbergh, Arthur Elgort were doing for COM, and then the people working for Matsuda and all the other Japanese designers were doing it as well, were actually reflecting that Japanese tradition of the photo book.
Yeah, quite possible. I mean, you know, Japanese culture, which in my life landed in the middle of the 1980s, I mean, it was fascinating. Have you ever traveled to Japan in the 1980s? It was such an extreme cultural shock for a Westerner to go to Japan. You know, it was really kind of, you know, looked like Blade Runner, to use a NAF film reference. But it was a kind of, you know, it was a very profound cultural shock. So I got completely absorbed in all of that. I know I'm not answering your question, Tim. But, you know, that for me was such a powerful interjection of a different culture into this. You know, you had Rei Kawakubo and Kono Gaston, Yohji Yamamoto, who produced these collections in the middle of the 1980s that looked different from anything else.
And Issei.
Sorry?
Issei Miyake is.
I don't know. Issei Miyake for me was always a little bit before, a little bit more acceptable, not so radical, and not so profound in what I saw. We live fashion through our own personal lived experience. So I'm not saying you're wrong, it's just not how it appeared in my eyes. I remember going to the Cours Carré du Louvre in Paris with Charlotte, my wife, and we would see, as you got closer and closer to the Yohji show, you see more and more people dressed totally in black, which at the time, people didn't dress totally in black. It was like watching this sort of army form around you. It was an incredibly powerful experience. And then you go to the catwalks themselves and watch these incredibly poetic collections. I remember one time, Yohji had no music to his show. He had a wooden catwalk, and he put sort of cowbells around the ankles of the models as they walked down the thing, which is a beautiful idea. However, talk about pearls before swine, you had all the kind of, what then were the kind of rugby scrum of catwalk photographers who were a rough bunch. You wouldn't want to get in the way of one of those. And they were making mooing noises. So these collections were literally kind of, you know, so delicate and aesthetically, you know, they completely missed a lot of the mainstream. And I remember being fascinated by the front row, thinking, these people look so miserable. They look so cross and look so just angry at everything, and so, you know, sort of cross because they had to sit there for another half an hour, and you go, you think you're being shown pure art. What is your problem? Anyway, so we have different lived experience of this. So Issei didn't really fit into that for me.
I'm wondering when, because I think of the Japanese fetishizing imagery anyway.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it was the Japanese who fetishized fashion images first.
Right.
And I wonder what you think about that, how you think that process kind of, because, you know, fashion is quite a fetishizing activity to begin with, so.
I'm not sure I either understand your question or agree with the premise of it.
Do you?
Sorry, Tim.
No. The adoration of the object. You know, like Japanese culture is very, very good at that. It's very good at creating these fetish objects out of very unlikely things, like a slice of cheesecake becomes a fetish object. I'm
struggling, but stretching here,
no,
Tim.
I'm curious. I'm thinking of that store in Tokyo that only sells slices of cheesecake. I'm wondering whether
that's not normal, Tim. That's
well,
weird.
it's fetishizing an object.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you feel that the fashion image was eventually fetishized in a way when you started having fashion images sold at auction, or books appearing, collecting work that maybe it had a commercial origin, or, you know, just that sort of where it became an art form, basically. When do you think that happened?
I think probably Philippe Garner started that process back in the 1970s. Philippe Garner was still is, a lovely man and a very good auctioneer at Sotheby's, and he had he was in Sotheby's in the early 1970s and had the first auction of photography as art, as I believe, is how I understand it. And I think from that point onwards, people started looking at photography and thinking, all right. And of course, you know, anybody who devotes their life to taking photographs, whether it's in a fashion context or another context. But fashion's a very visceral, alive medium. If you're photographing landscapes, I've done landscapes, the mountains don't move. You have to move with them. You have to find some way of making them come alive again. So fashion, I'm not being rude to landscape photographers, please, but fashion's very passionate medium to work in, which is partly why I love it. Partly because you have no stability within it as a medium. So you don't feel like, I've taken a great photograph today, therefore I take one tomorrow. I'm in fashion today, therefore, by definition, I'm out of fashion tomorrow. So you have no longevity in it and no prospect of stability in it, which I love. I love the fact that I'm having to fight for every time I get booked again, because I have to prove that I can still do something. If I was an actor, people would be quite happy to see my early films, my mid-career films, my late-career films. But a fashion photographer, they tend to go off the boil, And I'm sitting here as a fashion photographer saying this, and I've got no idea when my work will or has gone off the boil. But if you look at even the great photographers, who I will not name because they are my heroes, but you can see when they couldn't get it anymore, when they couldn't understand fashion, when they got bored of it. But if you read through the histories, people like Louise Dahl-Wolf would talk about, how models, their attitudes changed. Back in the 50s, models did their own hair and makeup. There was no other, you basically had the model and the photographer.
Supermodels in the late 80s, early 90s used to do their own makeup.
They used to do their own makeup?
Yeah, they did. You'd see them all backstage, doing their...
I'm talking about 1950s here, Tim. That's when they did their own hair and makeup in my version of fashion photography. Anyway, those things change, and photographers don't necessarily adapt to them, so they do go up a step. So my point I'm trying to make is fashion's a very exciting medium to work with, and you are being challenged all the time to prove that you can still get it. It's like being an Olympic runner, with respect. It's, you have to be able to show. And a lot of fashion photographers come in, they say something great, and everybody goes, oh, wow, and then they can't say it again.
You did mention to me once that there's something intrinsically peculiar when you're talking about fashion photographers aging. There ends up being something intrinsically peculiar about a 70, 75, 80-year-old man taking photos of a 16-year-old fashion model.
I find the sexualization of fashion photography quite difficult personally. I didn't like it when I was 25. I don't like it now. I find it something really odd. And it is partly because the way it works is you get sent a very good model to photograph, and they're great models, the Christy Turlingtons, the Naomis, or whoever you care to mention, all the names you might know, and they're very pretty young ladies. That's great. And they know how to model a piece of fashion, which is a skill. However, you have no personal relationship to them, so why would you want to portray them as if they're looking lovingly into your lens? Well, they're not, and you don't feel love towards them or sexual attraction towards them. So why pretend? And I've always found that quite difficult in fashion photography, this pretense that actually, and that's why when I started working for Yohji Yamamoto, I was photographing a young Naomi Campbell, but I created just a red shape out of her, and she was quite fed up about that. But anyway, that was my representation. I didn't want to engage with her as a woman or as a young girl. And I do remember, my wife Charlotte sitting over there, I do remember saying to Charlotte, at the time, I'm 28 now, there must be at some point in my life, I'm going to have to retake my license. I'm going to have to sort of resit my exams and get another kind of you can still do it type. And I think photographers in some ways should, because it is something weird about being a 65-year-old man photographing a 16-year-old girl as if she is in some way sexually motivated, or you're sexually motivated. And I find that a little bit. So that's why Yohji, for me, fitted very well with my sort of idea of kind of, how one should portray things.
So you're saying that that a sort of sexual fizz is a big part of fashion photography?
Well, it has been, Tim. If you look at all
like always?
No, not always. Certainly in the 60s and the 70s became that, and the 80s, in different ways. It's partly why fashion photography, as I said, became a sort of, out of touch with public zeitgeist. And it became this sort of bubble of behavior and very disproportionate sense of power. And that's why we had the whole Me Too thing that happened to fashion photography. And quite rightly, whatever it was, 8 years ago, I can't remember what it was now, a lot of photographers were found to be behaving in ways that weren't great, but it didn't only happen in fashion, it didn't only happen in photography, it happened in banking and in tennis and in ballet and architecture and everywhere else. It happened in every art form where there's a huge imbalance of power. But photography had grown up in these sort of closed environments. You go into a white studio, into a white cove, and the door shuts. And that's where, I think it's great because you are free of any normality, reality, and you are free to create. But if your intent is to sexualize your subject or to use your power as a highly paid fashion photographer or fashion stylist or art director or whatever to coerce people who haven't got that power into doing things that otherwise would not do, that's when it goes wrong. I think fashion became that. Not completely, but in some parts.
And it's interesting because the history of fashion photography seems to ride on these key relationships between a photographer and a model. If you go back to Steichen and Marianne Morehouse, or Avedon and Susie Parker, or Bailey and Shrimpton, or Mizell and Evangelista.
Very different relationships, Tim, but yes.
Well, they are, yes.
Just on Bailey there, I'm going to interrupt, I'm so sorry. Just to get clear, Bailey was part of a sexual revolution. He was part of the sexual revolution, freedom, that women had the choice that they could have sex without becoming pregnant. Because of the contraceptive pill. That was part of a huge cultural revolution. Therefore, it's reflected in the work of people like David Bailey and the more Lothario-orientated photographers. Very good film called Blow Up, very good version of it. So, that's photography reflecting cultural change. That's fashion photography reflecting cultural change.
But I also think it's I like those relationships because they do remind me of Erich von Stroheim and Marlene Dietrich, was it von Stroheim? No, Sternberg and Dietrich, or of course my mind goes blank when I'm trying to think of a director and a movie star who had a very kind of fruitful relationship.
Or any of the Hitchcock and
Hitchcock and the blondes, the masked blondes. But what those relationships produced was some of the most timeless, those fashion relationships, some of the most timeless photographs. And there's, if the frisson, well, I know you rolled your eyes at Mizell and Evangelista, the frisson mightn't be sexual, but
it is
definitely
in a different
is
way,
like,
I guess.
It is that kind of finding an instrument for your vision, the thrill of Picasso and his many wives or whatever, the sense of an artist being provoked to a higher level by this creature he has to embody, he, I suppose I should say she as well, has to embody a vision. And I'm surely you've found that in your career, even if you say those pretty girls who come in front of your lens.
No, I'm trying to say dismissive. I'm trying to do shorthand, really. Great fashion models are exactly that. Great. They really understand. They're sort of a cross between an actor and a sports person. They know how to take the narrative from a piece of clothing and express it. And if you ever work with if I've ever had to photograph an actress, they don't get it. They're great, they're who they are, but they don't get it because they're not used to doing 200 takes regularly. So if I photograph Kate Moss, and I had to photograph her once on a swing and take different pictures at every point on the swing so it could be made into a lenticular picture, which is a sort of picture which when you turn it, it moves. Kate sat on that swing and did that for 9 hours or something like that. I need to go on a swing for 9 hours. It's not much fun. Now, actresses are not used to working that way. A great fashion model will be able to show you, really importantly, how much better the dress looks if she turns her wrists that way than that way. Actors won't have a clue. An actress is taught to make themselves nothing, to have no self-image. So it's a completely different thing. So I didn't mean to in any way to be dismissive of the talent of a great fashion model. No way. They're incredibly talented at what they do. It's just a supposed relationship that I felt pressure to try and show in my photograph. When I first started, a lot of the magazines and the people who were trying to look to employ me were a bit sort of, well, your pictures are so cold, Mr. Knight. They're so, so unemotional. You're a bit frigid. I thought, well, that's fine. I don't want to be romantically involved with any of these people. I get my interest in people from the people who would be loosely called on the margins of society. Now, I actually don't believe there are margins of society because that is implies a whole bunch of things I also don't believe in. But that's where I'm interested. That's where I find people who are interested, because I love living through other people's lives in a way, just as much in the way I did with Alexander McQueen or John Galliano. And Alexander McQueen was an incredible mind, an incredible, I wouldn't say tortured, but a difficult soul. My job was to understand him, to understand his vision, to understand his dreams, and show them back to him in a way that would inspire him. That's quite a job, and it's quite a privilege. So I loved getting into his mind. So I love people who are nothing like me. I love people learning about people who are very different from who I am. And I tend to find these people, you can find them standing at a bus stop, or you can find them, in a 7-Eleven, or who you look at them and you think, wow, how do you live your life? And there's a young man I photographed quite a lot at the moment called Tino. Tino's a lovely chap, covered in tattoos from head to foot. He's a young rapper, and he's had I won't divulge anything in public, but he has lived a little bit on the wrong side of the tracks, shall we say. But I find that fascinating, how he deals every day with being covered in tattoos all over his face, all over his, everywhere, etc., etc., and how that makes him have to approach every single encounter he has, and how therefore that forms him as a person. I find that fascinating. And of course, he likes a recognition, and he likes it's a relationship in the way that he likes the fact I'm interested in him, and also it's self-promotion. He's a rapper. I'm just, I can bring something to that. So those are the sorts of people I do find personal interest in, not sexual personal interest. I find personal interest in wanting to understand their lives.
And you are photographing him as a private project, or?
No, he does videos for his songs, so I'd happily, we have £2.50 to do them in.
So you don't think of that as like a fashion photography assignment? That's...
Well, he's very fashionable in his own sector of what fashion is. The thing we mentioned is that, Vogue used to set the tone, or Harper's Bazaar used to set the tone. Since the internet's come along, nobody sets the tone. Just so many different facets of, there's no one opinion. Back in the day, skirt length would come up 2 inches, every skirt length would come up 2 inches. Now, what does it matter? Somebody living in Tokyo will see the same things as somebody living in Mexico, somebody living over here. We're all in this sort of, weird sort of cultural crossover going on at the moment. So there isn't any one person setting the tone. So it makes fashion very different to how it used to be.
More exciting for you, though.
More exciting because I can dip out of different things. But I work with lots of different people. So I can work with a Christian Dior, or I can work with Kanye West. They're both very fashion. Kanye West clothes sell like wildfire. Christian Dior handbags need a bit of a shove, but they do sell.
When you mention Tino, though, and the people that you're drawn to, do you feel... How different do you feel that... do you have a different approach to photographing? Is there a Nick Knight approach, or do you approach different subjects in a completely different way?
No, I approach everybody in the same way, Tim, with respect. And I think that's... I don't want to sound sanctimonious, but that's how you approach people, with a certain amount of awe, interest, and respect, and kindness.
But I feel you're more engaged by certain people than others, and that would suggest the work would have more kind of emotional content. Or
yeah, there are certain people that I photographed over my career that I found interesting as people, but they're usually people who come from quite a difficult part of life. A young lady I photographed called Demi, who came, I saw her on Instagram, thought she looked great, DM'd her on Instagram, said, I think you look great, can I take your photograph? And then I did, and she was great, and she was just not very tall, a bit like Kate Moss isn't very tall. But she came from a difficult background. Her father had been in prison all the way through her life. One time he got out of prison, he went to see her brother, not her. Her mother was a prostitute and a drug addict. She became a drug addict. She had an abusive boyfriend, and she took her own life. Those are the sorts of people that I find a lot of empathy for, not because that's anywhere reflective, clearly, of my life. I came from a very stable family. I have a very long-term loving relationship. I don't do drugs, et cetera, et cetera. So in a way, I find those sort of people fascinating. But in a way, you might go to a movie where you might be fascinated by, was it Christian F? What was the Berlin? Christian F? Christian F. So those sort of films which show us people's lives that we can't live. We don't want to live.
This is a sort of photojournalistic approach in a way, more than...
No, it's a motivation. It's what I'm fascinated by. It's what I find empathy for, a certain amount of heartbreak for. So and also bringing something, and it's a weird, and I'm happy to be judged on this or analysed on this if anybody would want to or care to, but why I want to do that. Am I painting myself as some sort of, because there's a relationship, it's a transactional relationship. You know, I photograph this young lady, then she gets more modelling jobs, she makes more money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I also become some sort of surrogate father figure for her, which is very dangerous. You know, so it's a difficult, none of these are easy relationships. None of them are easy because they are not with people who are from stable relationships in the first place. And you have to be careful. Photography is a dangerous medium. We used to be very careful because with the internet, you can see somebody in New Orleans, and I remember there's a girl called, she was a young black girl, and she was in New Orleans. This was about 15 years ago. And she used to do this dance called Sissy Bounce, which basically is one of those dances where your bottom goes up and down very fast. So she used to do that. I saw her on the internet. She appeared in some Sissy Bounce kind of movies, not movies, videos of, I can't speak this evening. So she's appeared in some, what am I trying to say? Music videos. Thank you, Charlotte. That's why I love you so much. She appeared in some music videos doing this dance. I saw her on the internet, thought she looks great. Managed it because you can get through to anybody anywhere now, and brought her across from New Orleans. Of course, I meet her. I put her in Alexander McQueen. Alexander McQueen wanted her in one of his campaigns. And she was great, amazing dancer, amazing physique. I mean, but she goes back, you know, she stays with me, not with me, she stays in my circle, you know, she comes to the shoot for 3 days, we put her in these amazing Alexander McQueen, all the hairdresser makeup, swoon over and say, oh, you're amazing, the stylist. She gets total praise and love and adoration quite naturally, because we all do think she's amazing. We go, thank you very much, bye. And off she goes back to New Orleans to McDonald's. And the night before she came, her boyfriend was shot in the face. So you have to be a little bit careful with this sort of power to go, oh, I like you, oh, let's look at you. So as I said at the beginning of this, I'm not happy, but I'm aware that it's not necessarily a totally okay thing to do. But it isn't done out of any desire to do anything other than just to, you know, I'm fascinated by these people. And she still writes to me, I still see her on Instagram.
So there's almost like a Svengali aspect to that story that you...
Well, we can call it that. I don't think it is, because then the Svengali thing, there's some idea that they would then often become rich and famous, and they don't. And not the rich or famous are either things you want to be.
But you're here today, and I'm talking to you as a fashion photographer, but right now, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about your recording lives from the margins that you feel are worthy of recording, which seems to be what people like Nadar did in the 19th century, you know, that when they first had a camera, the things they wanted to take photos of were things, I mean, they wanted to use this new medium to seal for posterity images. I mean, they'd photograph in abattoirs and hospitals and things. And
there's a big tradition of this. I doubt I would be able to help me. There's a photographer who again photographed in New Orleans. Is it H.J. Belcock?
Yes, Bullock.
Bullock, thank you for the pronunciation, Tim. Anyway, H.J. Bullock, who there's a film about called Pretty Baby, which is a really dodgy film. Anyway, never mind. But he was quite a dodgy guy. And he photographed the prostitutes of New Orleans. He was the only person doing it.
He was also one of the earliest photographers. So you have something, you have a way to tell people stories that maybe I'm sitting in Auckland, New Zealand in the mid-19th century, and I don't know about what's happening on battlefields in the Civil War or whatever, but then Matthew Brady comes along with a camera, and he can, and deliberately showing his audience these horrors, that being able to communicate what he see for the first time. It's not Goya doing a sketch or something. It's an actual photograph of reality.
Dodgy.
Yes, there you go. I know.
Really dodgy.
But, I know there's all the Charge of the Light Brigade photographs and all that stuff. But
no, but my point is then that's problematic for photography. Because photography comes, 200 years ago, photography gets ushered in as this sort of medium, there's two visions of photography. There's it's as good as painting, so let's make it look like painting, and all the pictorialists and photo successionists and the early Stieglitz and early Steichen and all of those guys were saying, okay, well, I'll show you it's a proper art form, because look, it's just like painting, and I look like a painter and it's all blurred. And then there are the kind of, the photographers who are saying, I'll show you, or I'm being asked to show you reality. Well, photography isn't reality any more than painting's reality. It's one singular moment taken out of context with the rest of it cropped. I do a picture of you here. I'm not showing the gentleman over there. It's not a reality. You know, the best photographs are away from a reality. They're an opinion. They're a strongly held, strongly believed opinion. And that's why, you know, somebody like, who was a chap, my memory's failing me, but a chap that rearranged the cannonballs because they look better up that side of the valley.
The charge of the Light Brigade for photographs.
What's his name?
Like the Matthew Brady of the Crimean War.
We make a great, two older men trying to remember anything.
No, and he also put different negatives together to create panoramas.
So all that trickery was done in the idea they were bringing forward a vision, you know, which painting of truth, which painting apparently wasn't set up to do, but nothing could be further from the truth.
So, where does fashion photography fit into that huge stew of different impulses? There's the urge to shock, the urge to inform, the urge to entertain, to help people escape from their lives. I mean,
where does it fit in for me, or where does it fit in for
just generally? But also, I mean, it feels to me that if you look at a collection of famous fashion images, you're going to get all of that.
Sorry, you get all of that. You don't get all of it. You do get all of it. Yeah.
One gets all of it.
Yes, yeah. Well, fashion photography is an incredibly powerful medium, which is why I've stayed in it for the last 40 years. So, you know, I wouldn't want to do anything else.
So where do you like to see your pictures now? If you're talking about how magazines have been, essentially
that's a presumption that I like to see my pictures, which is not the truth, I'm afraid. Pictures are the forming mirror. It's why I've shied away from exhibitions. I did for years. I wouldn't want to exhibit, partly because exhibiting a photograph takes, you know, making an exhibition photograph takes you a lot of time studying your past, and we're only all here for a short amount of time relatively. I'm 65, I've got that much longer to go. I don't really want to spend my time looking back in my archive and go, this is a great image I took in 1985. So I shunned it for a long time. It was only when I was given an exhibition in Seoul in Korea, I thought, well, I like that part of the world. Now, let's try it once. So I did a show, and I actually enjoyed the process of it. So I thought, okay, there's some benefit for me. If I can create a show which, when people see the show, they leave it thinking, the future's exciting. That's what I want my show of photography to do, or image making to do. It's just, sure, go on a journey that I've gone, and I'll show you, hopefully, as entertaining as possibly the journey I went on. But I don't want you to come out of the exhibition saying, oh, it was great in the 80s, I wish I was... You know, I want you to go out saying, this medium is so great. I want to go out and take images. I want to make films. I want to make sculptures. I want to be, you know, because it's made me feel so excited. So if you can use your exhibition not to glorify great photographs you've taken, which is a very, you know, not what I feel about my work, you know, but you can use it to use a sort of energy to push people to create. But this is one of the things I love about Instagram. You know, people are becoming visually literate. You know, before we weren't. Most of the nation couldn't, most of the world could not compose, had no idea how they looked. But now everybody has a camera. Now everybody's starting to enter into, you know, some sort of awareness of creating an image of themselves. I think that's fantastic. The democratization of image making is fantastic. And I love it for that.
Well, you did this thing on your phone one day. You were showing me something with your finger, and you were doing a treatment, and I was just, my tiny mind was absolutely blown. And you're one person through Show Studio and then through your own work who's inspired by technology. So how has technology changed fashion photography?
Well, technology has always changed fashion photography. You know, it moved from the kind of, you know, the big 10-8 camera in the studio, which photographers couldn't move, so they moved the model. You know, it was quite a sedentary affair. And then all of a sudden, you've got someone like Munkasi comes along, who's a sports photographer, with a much smaller camera, and he can run down the beach with the girls. So that changed fashion photography. Yeah, so of course, even that sort of basic changes in format of cameras, which is a technological change, changes it. But yes, you're quite right. Now, since the beginning of the middle of the 1990s, when we had a sort of, you know, the internet appears and we have a digital revolution in image making, and I stopped calling myself a photographer because it's no longer applicable. Yeah, that really changes things. You know, I don't want to sound silly, but if I was going to do an image of you now, you know, I would get you dressed and everything, and I would walk around you 3 times with my iPhone, recording here, recording, and then I would have a 3-dimensional image of you, which I could view afterwards in post from any angle I wanted. I could put any lighting I choose afterwards, and I could then put some motion capture into you, and I could make you walk, and I can sample your voice, and I can have you talk, and I can I can decide your emotion. So with an AI now, I can get an avatar of you, and I can say, okay, is Tim very sarcastic? Is he very loving? Is he amorous? And I can decide your emotion. I did that on an avatar I created, and I thought, oh, I'll go for sarcastic. You really don't want to go for sarcastic. 100% sarcastic is not good. That's a really unpleasant interaction. My avatar said to me, I said goodbye, and it wrote back to me, yeah, bye. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. It's like, okay, fine. So we'll take sarcasm down a bit then. But it's a set of sliders. You have sad, happy, sarcastic, honest, whatever it is. And you just set sliders. So that's totally changing now how I would create an image. That's why I don't call myself a photographer anymore, because it's not really photography. It's right out. Photography is a very simple way to describe, the work that Muybridge did, or Mapplethorpe did, or Avedon or Agite. They're all photographers. They're all defined by the same medium. As soon as you step outside of that, which is what digital image making allowed us to do, and we've now, of course, we've much talked about AI and all manner of 3D scanning and motion capture. You're into a different ball game. I'm writing words into a computer and getting a sculpture out. Why would I call myself a photographer?
So we right back at that question. What does this mean for fashion photography?
Well, fashion photography died a long time ago. What it means for fashion photography, because photography died a long time ago. I said that it's partly to be a little bit naughty and to tease photographers, but it did. We all have a phone now. Every single person in this room has probably got a phone. Every single person in this room articulates some idea of visuals. So people are very, very capable of doing that. Photography, and of course it didn't die, but it became not the zeitgeist medium that it was. It's not how we express things. Photography was backed up by magazines. Magazines don't sell anymore. It was backed up by books. Books aren't selling anymore. The structure that supported photography and supported fashion photography in particular is broken. And it's not going to get mended. It's broken. We all see stuff. We see our news on our phones. We see imagery on our phones. We articulate our phones. Designers don't have to do a catwalk show. They can go straight onto Instagram. It's a different system. And so if there's a different system there, why are we trying to persuade people to use one that stopped so long ago? And fashion should be about change. It should be about newness. It should be about embracing what's coming next. Fashion photography is a sort of future predictive medium. It's not telling you what you look like now. It's telling you what you'll want to look like next season. So, why...
Or next century, actually. I think next season's kind
You're not trying to change for a while, Tim.
I just think that next season's kind of... It's such a
Well,
what's happening with the industry, the whole fashion industry is...
I mean, it's an incredibly exciting time.
Okay. The whole, you say photography is finished and fashion photography.
I don't think it's finished, but it's not the medium that most people use or most people understand. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's important to say this. If you're trying to create there is a new medium happening. I can write 3 words into a computer and get a sculpture sent back to me, okay? That is amazing. A linguist, somebody whose skill it is in words, like yourself, can now put your words into an AI and you get sent back imagery. That crosses over some deep cultural divide. And I think you don't want to be sort of saying, yes, but it's not real photography. Of course it isn't real photography, nor should it be. There's such a huge cultural wave crashing around the moment.
Yeah.
We can't see its parameters. We've got no idea how big it is, how fundamental it is, how life-changing it is. So the idea that saying, well, I'm a photographer, and then nothing makes sense after that statement, that's why I say photography is dead. It's not because it's dead. It's because we should put our energy into this new medium without the idea of sort of saying, well, it's not a real photograph, so it hasn't got a negative, and it wasn't taken on please.
But will there still be a medium that records people doing things in clothes?
Yes, Tim, there will. And it's happening all the time. Everything. We're probably being filmed now. This will probably go on the internet.
We'll be looking at it in new ways. There'll be completely new ways to experience these images. We won't be turning pages
You
in a
won't be
magazine.
turning pages. I don't think we're turning pages, no. I mean, you might want to turn a page. I'm sure you can print out a book of your Instagram camera feed if you want. But no, I don't think that's where the excitement's going to be. You know, I think there's three. I was talking to a very nice young lady called Letitia, I think might be in the audience, from El País just before we started this. And I was saying, you know, there are three visions. I'm 65. I have to sort of think what's going to happen to my archive. And there are three visions I have of it. Either I get a dramatic, poetic, let's burn a lot of it. Let's just exist for the moment. Why should I go on? When I'm past, my work should just go with the wind, like the dust. There's that vision. There's a more sensible vision, which is where you file it properly and you get a foundation and you get some clever and intelligent and kind people to look after it and keep it going. And then there's the idea that, you know, there's so much out in the internet. Every picture you've taken is out there. You know, it doesn't take long. If you look at all my career, you can, if you say I've taken 100,000 photographs over my career, if you did a quick analysis, you'd see it mostly, I hold my camera at this height. Mostly I photograph with this color. You know, there's a whole bunch of repetitive traits I've done. And so it doesn't take much imagination to imagine an AI that could then start redoing those. And actually, maybe we just keep on living. Maybe the internet is our, you know, I got into a lovely conversation with this young lady. You know, we talk about evolution. People evolve for the better. You know, societies evolve, and it is for the better. And we don't know where we are in our evolutionary journey. So are we, you know, and where are we going? And there's a certain arrogance to think that we are so perfect, we are worth preserving.
Oh my God, overwhelming arrogance, terrible.
Yeah.
That's why we're where we are.
We are a carbon-based life form. Are we so much better than the possibility of a silicon-based life form? Anyway, me starting talking about things like that is probably a clear sign we should start to...
Yeah, and I was just going to say that this definitely means that Nick Knight will not be doing landscapes in 5 years.
Well, you know, actually, I enjoyed it. I photographed some mountains last couple of years ago. Loved it. Up in a helicopter, doors open, with my iPhone, minus 27. Tell Johnny Ives or whoever makes them, they don't work at that temperature. But anyway, yeah, great. Love photographing mountains. But you have to find a new way of photographing mountains because, you know, they don't move. And, you know, they don't jump and they don't twist and they don't turn, they don't show you, nothing. So you have to do it for them.
They were here before us. So.
They were, and they were here after we'd gone, Tim.